Chapter 16 Little Men. In the morning, Corrine unwrapped her father's bandage and found a soft red scab covering her wound. She touched it. It hurt, but not too much. She picked her oranges for the day and walked slowly to market. As she limped up the dusty road, the forest on her right side seemed to crowd in. She began to sweat, and the hairs on her arms stood on end. For the first time, the mahogany forest made her heart beat fast, or hard inside her chest. She remembered the eyes she had seen in the forest days ago, and she remembered that last night Severine's eyes had the same gleam. "It's the same forest I've lived next to every day of my life," she told herself as the shivers crawled up her arms like a wave of insects. The stories about Jumbies are just things that grown people say when they make up stories at night. She tried to laugh off the idea of Severine as a Jumbie. She walked on a few steps. But what did those eyes belong to? And where did Severine come from? She said she lived close enough to walk, but no one knows her. Corrine put down her basket near the well and slipped a few of the small oranges into her pockets. She hesitated for a moment, but thought of her father and the way he looked at Severine last night, like she was a stranger. Corrine crossed the road, pushed aside a tangle of branches, and stepped inside the forest. It was cooler among the trees. A few harmless animals scurried away from her feet. She swallowed hard and moved on. When the road was out of sight, she put an orange in the crook of a branch to mark the spot where she entered. She walked on for a few minutes, searching around, and placed oranges as markers, but she found nothing that seemed out of place for a forest. Then, on the other side of a tree, she heard a light rustle. Her pulse quickened. She followed the sound and placed her last orange in a branch above her. Around the corner side of the tree trunk, a shrub shivered as though something had just gone past it. She followed the shaking path of the leaves until they stopped beneath a fat, short tree. She combed the leaves apart and looked behind them. "Oh," Corrine said, surprised. There was a child sitting on the damp ground, playing with soft, wet dirt between its fingers. It was wearing a woven hat shaped like a short white cone. When the child looked up at her beneath the hat brim, Corrine could only see its mouth. It was shaped into the form of an O. It echoed, "Oh, oh, 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 oh," and with each syllable the voice grew deeper until it was less like a child's and more like a man's. Corrine stepped back. She saw several other little man children standing around the squat tree. The small thing had not been imitating her. It had been calling to its own kind. Corrine had heard enough stories to know that these were called Dûens, baby spirits that steal children straight from their homes. Corrine froze from fear. There was something else she had heard about Dûens. As one of the little men got up, Corrine tried to get to see its feet. It took an awkward step towards her. Its feet were turned backwards. Now she was sure. A scream left Corrine's throat. A small flock of kiskadee rose up into the air, and a manaqua and a bright green iguana scurried into some underbrush. The sound of the animals moving unfroze Corrine, and she ran too. Corrine went to the last tree she'd marked and grabbed the orange. She turned and threw it at the little Jumbie coming towards her. The Jumbie caught it and continued on. Corrine ran to the next tree. Now all the Dûens were moving towards her. With every step they chanted, "Oh, oh, oh." The sound filled her ears, her head, and matched time with her heartbeat until it felt like the Dûens' sounds were becoming part of her. It took all her strength to grab the next orange and throw it again. This one burst onto the shoulder of another Dûen, but the tough little Jumbie walked on as if nothing had touched it. Corrine kept moving, though each step felt harder than the last, like swimming against a current. She threw a third orange as hard as she could behind her. Then there were no more oranges. She looked for the road, but it was nowhere near. She had marked more trees. She was sure of it, but the oranges were all gone. She was lost. Her heart pounded faster. She looked around for a clue of which way to run, but all the trees looked alike. She tried to feel the air against her cheek, but all she noticed was sweat dripping down her skin. Her legs felt weak and wobbly. She couldn't get them to move the way she wanted to. The Dûens had her surrounded. The army of tiny Dûens was closing in, their calls growing louder and louder when a small frog hopped into the circle and stopped in front of Corrine. "Oh," the Dûen said, distracted by the frog. "Oh, Oh, oh. It hopped once towards them. The Doan closest to the frog leaned in. A few licked their lips. Just as one of the Doans lunged at it, the frog hopped out of reach. It hopped closer to the Doans again, and hopped away when another one of them tried to grab it. Each time the frog drew them farther and farther away from Kareen. Was that the same frog from the well? Kareen barely had time to wonder as the frog lured the Doans all together. When they all lunged for the frog, the Jumbies landed in a heap, some with their fingers just a hair's breadth from the frog's back legs. The frog turned and hopped towards a barely noticeable path. Then it turned again and hopped away deeper into the forest. Without the Doan's sounds filling her head, Kareen could think clearly. Her legs began to work again. She sprinted down the path the frog had revealed. Her injured leg hurt, but she didn't stop. A few moments later, she burst out onto the road and stood panting and blinking in the sunlight. Drew was right. Jumbies are real.